don't know if you guys saw the JUCO rule where your JUCO years don't count against you. It's insane how much more difficult it is to be recruited right now as a high school athlete relative to when we were growing up, even a couple of years ago. And I don't know if, do you think kids have a grasp over that? Do you think high school kids understand how much the game has changed? I mean, do you guys ever think about that at all, or not really?
I can't say I do a ton, but I mean, yeah, you look at the transfer portal, you look at the JUCO rule. Like I can see from a college coach perspective why you would go to those routes before a high school kid. And I think maybe it's just understanding you have to like maybe start at a SDSU and work your way up is part of the reality now. Like find a JUCO, find an SDSU, find a lower level and transfer your way up. I feel like that's kind of the reality of things now. You don't really see players sticking all 4 or 5 years at a same school. I think that'll be a rarity as we get more and more into this NIL stuff. But I mean, it was interesting. I think it might have been the Ohio State defense. Like they still had a bunch of fifth years, a bunch of fourth years. So maybe I'm wrong, and maybe schools will stick with their guys, and the guys will stick with their schools. But yeah, it's an interesting dynamic.
I think it'll affect those. Like the game has changed with those like mid-major level schools. I think the top 4-star, 5 stars will still find their way to those Power 4, Power 5 schools, and then yeah, like you said, everyone else will have to go FCS or JUCO route because I think all those Group of 4 and even like extending the basketball Group of 4 mid-major schools, it's just going to be all transfer portal. Like I was at that level coaching, and it's just gone to not even bringing in freshmen anymore. It's just going to the portal and finding JUCO kids or finding transfers, whether that's kids coming up from a lower level or kids who are at a Power 4 school who didn't want to make it or didn't want to wait and transfer down so they can play, but then they come there for a year, and then if they play well, they're probably going to go back up to that level somewhere else, or maybe they don't stick around because they don't like their playing time and go somewhere else. So it'll just be more one and dones unless sticking there throughout a whole 4 or 5 years, except for those cultured programs like Iowa and I would have said SDSU, but now with their coaching staff change, who knows if that'll be the case anymore. So
Yeah.
I don't know.
Let's come back to the SDSU thing, but continuing on this point, like if you think about basketball specifically, like let's say that because more than likely at the top of like where we live, and that's most of the people that are listening to this show are probably somewhere in the Midwest or Iowa specifically. If you're in Iowa specifically, more than likely the best players in Iowa are borderline like high major basketball players or low major. You know what I mean? They're somewhere between a UNI or Creighton, Iowa State. You know what I mean? Like they're probably a Drake or Creighton, right? They're kind of right in between those two. Or maybe they're right between like a D2 low major, right? But they're kind of and that's at like the very cream of the crop, right? But I guess my point is like more than likely those guys aren't making the NBA. You know what I mean? Like you can think about the state of Iowa, and there's like a handful of guys that have made the NBA. And so, but the nice thing for them is that the money pool has moved down, right? So like you don't have to make the NBA to be paid as a professional basketball player anymore. And you also don't have to go overseas to make money playing professional basketball. Like you can make money playing basketball as a 19 through 24 year old, let's call it, in the States. But I guess my point is I feel like there's a gap in the JUCO and prep school world in the state of Iowa. and surrounding states, I think that certainly on both coasts, there is more of that world where kids are reclassing or whatever. They're going to prep school for a year and then they're going to JUCO. But like it is, if you're in that tier and you're not going to play in the NBA, it is detrimental for you to go to a South Dakota State where maybe you're making, let's say you're not touted recruit, but you're a good recruit. I don't know, maybe you're making 15,000 or something like that. Whereas you could go JUCO, not waste your eligibility, still maintain your window for a professional career, okay? And if you have, and you work it up to it, and then you make it to an Iowa State or an Iowa or a Creighton, for example, you're obviously, if you become a high-level recruit there from JUCO, you're obviously going to make more money than if you were to go to an SDSU. For example, I think the last 3 players that have gone to Iowa State are all making over 400,000, right? So they have 3 players, and one of them is not even a starter. So they have a player on their roster that's not a starter that's making over 400,000, right? So like again, he's not overseas. He's probably maybe never going to make it to the NBA, but he's getting his money pool at 21 of 400,000, and it wouldn't help you to go to an SDSU to waste your eligibility when you could have got that money for 3 or 4 years instead of 1 or 2. You know what I'm saying? So, but like you think about the type of school that is available at the FCS or the low major versus a JUCO. Like I would much rather go to an SDSU or an NDSU or a Drake than an Iowa Western, or you know what I mean? Like that environment to me isn't. So I feel like you're going to see a huge increase in the opportunities. I feel like there's an opportunity to step into that space in the Midwest and really bulk up these JUCO schools, prep schools type of a thing. And you're seeing it already in Iowa or in Des Moines a little bit with the Iowa United deal or whatever. But I mean, they're kind of, their kids are coming from other countries and et cetera. But I'm talking about we had 2 kids last year that played for our 17U team that were like UNO type kids, you know what I mean? Like right on that type of a border. And then that JUCO rule came in and then that recruiting stopped. And so now certainly their best situation is to go to a JUCO, But again, like how many kids are going to go to JUCO? You know what I mean? Like how many kids can go to Iowa Western? Only 5 players see the court at a time. So it's just a really interesting, I don't know, world opportunity. I think was just the game's changed,
especially with the roster limits too. Like
yeah.
I mean, with the transfer portal, kids are going to be forced to maybe not even have an option, but to go to a JUCO school or I don't know, NAIA or D2. But it'll be interesting to see how that roster limit affects everything, and especially with the walk-on thing. Like, what would you have done in your shoes? Let's say Iowa had a 105 roster limit. What would you have done if they said like we can't take you? Would you have?
I would have been to North Dakota
obviously,
State.
hindsight, but NDSU.
Yeah, which would have changed everything in my life. You know what I mean? So I would have, but probably NDSU. So yeah, but like what they only signed a couple preferred walk-ons this year. Wasn't it like 3 or 4 or 7 or something like that? Whereas in past, like my walk-on class was like, my total class was like 34. You know what I mean? And probably 18 of those were scholarship. It was like half, which is wild. I mean, those were all good players, like really, really good players.
Yeah.
Those were recruited players, Those weren't, you showed up and worked out and you rooted your way onto the team. It was, recruited. You were recruited there. It's interesting because the roster went from 125 to 105.
Was there even a limit?
I don't know that there was a limit.
I'm sure there was like the travel roster, but I'm pretty sure like Nebraska's always had like 150 people on the roster. Like even more so for them, they've always had a ton of walk-ons.
I think there was a camp limit, maybe. right? I think there was a camp, but I think once
Yeah.
the season started, I think you're right. I think that limit was kind of lifted. I know there was always an influx of kids that came after camp was done, and then could be used for scout teams and whatever stuff like that. So it's
I don't know.
it's reshaping. You know, it's I mean, it is professional. You know, so it's all of that stuff. I don't know. I just thinking about, like, I told you I was going to Nebraska Elite practice. Like, if I was asked to give a message, like, what would I say? And it's like, well, however hard you were working before, maybe you better turn it up. There's going to be really, really, really good high school players that aren't really looked at anymore. Really, really, really good. In Omaha, in Des Moines, across the state. How much harder is it going to be for a small school kid? Let alone someone that's playing at the highest level at 4A or Class A in Omaha. So,
Yeah, might just take some humility and accept going to a lower level, but just balling out and trusting that. I don't know. You can find your way to a higher level, which it's a little sad that there's not that commitment to the school you play for, but it's the world we live in, and at the end of the day, you just got to do what's best for you.